Welcome to Monday, January 27th, 2025. Well, welcome to a new week. What's in store this week? Well, we're going to finally see a storm system go across the southern parts of the U.S. from the desert Southwest and Southern California to the southern plains. And that will bring some areas of rain and snow to areas that really haven't seen much of anything for quite a while. As that storm goes across the southern tier, that means the central and northern Rockies are going to have a pretty quiet week of weather. So we are going to have some fairly decent weather. Temperatures aren't going to be as cold. We're not going to have as much wind. And today through Friday, a lot of the central and northern Rockies will be dry. So kind of a break in the action for those areas. When we look further ahead, we'll start to see the weather pattern get a bit more active, especially in the Pacific Northwest and the northern Rockies by the weekend, with some Pacific moisture starting to push on in. We will see an easing of the Arctic air across the nation this week, although New England and the northeastern United States will start off the week very cold, as a more Pacific-dominated pattern will develop. Now, we get into our weather models are starting to have some real issues. And we talked about this where we're not quite sure what early February was going to do based on what's going on in the Pacific. And the models are having a real hard time with it. It's a real complex pattern, and we'll show you why the models are having problems. So we're not going to try to get too far ahead of ourselves. Some nice shots over the weekend from places like Mesquite, Nevada, which show very little moisture around, but lots of contrails and a lot of mid and high level clouds there developing ahead of that low coming out of Southern California. The same there in southern Colorado. You can see the wave features very nicely there. And those high-level clouds there in the San Luis Valley area. And then a very frosty, very wintry scene along the Interstate 80 corridor of southern Wyoming this weekend, with light snowfall and very, very cold temperatures. And ice fishing huts finally showing up across the region for December. Boy, there was very little ice fishing. Now the ice is thick and widespread in many areas. And that cold pattern you're getting at night, this is a shot of the steam coming out of the Glen Rock, Wyoming power plant there, getting trapped in the cold air along the North Platte River. And clear skies as we got into late last week over the Tetons, as we had a nice little break before that front came on through. The northern Black Hills, it's quite amazing. I was in the Black Hills this weekend. The southern Black Hills, the snow is extremely thin. You get into the northern Black Hills, there's a lot more snow on the ground, and at least for another week, that'll be the trend as well. Although for the southern Black Hills, as we get deeper into February and then into March, you're going to start to see your snows returning to the region. A beautiful shot there from Centennial. Now the shot of the satellite image. You can see there's very little going on across a lot of the nation here. It doesn't look like much, but if you zoom in, and we'll zoom in here in a minute, to Southern California, you see these puffy clouds right here? These are areas of showers and precipitation going counterclockwise around this low in Southern California. So some rain down there. We have winter weather advisories for snow in the Southern California mountains, and that low is going to be heading due east. And as it does so, you'll see that's where we are as of early this morning. The low over the weekend, as we discussed on Friday, was going to split. One going back into Southern California, the other one going into the Great Lakes in New England. This is the cold that will head into the northeastern United States this weekend, with the high still along the west coast. Now, this is by today. This is by Thursday. So you can see it takes 4 days. That upper low is going to take its sweet time going across the desert Southwest into the plains. It doesn't have a ton of moisture to work with. They usually don't, because you're trying to pull air from here if you want moisture. It doesn't quite have time yet to get Gulf of Mexico moisture coming on in. So what we're going to likely see is this system is going to be able to produce moisture, but the more east you go, the better the moisture will be. Nonetheless, areas here in the south that have been very quiet here lately finally going to have a chance for a little bit of moisture clouds and cooler weather. It starts to accelerate by Friday. So this is by Thursday morning. This is by Friday morning. It starts to move into the Midwest. So what we're going to see, generally speaking, is all the action in the south. Temperatures this week are going to be warmer. This is the anomaly compared to the 30-year average. So you can see across the Intermountain West, it is still going to be a little on the cool side. Not terribly cold, but still a little bit below average. And if you're below average in late January, you're cold. Temperatures, though, moderating above average in the Dakotas, Canada. There's the cold in the Northeast. But this part of the U.S. right here is going to get relief from the Arctic cold. When we take a look at the precipitation path, you can really see, or you can kind of draw a line right here where Gulf moisture is able to come up. There's going to be moisture along the path of the low here, but a little bit moisture starved. Then it begins to tap into that moisture, and you see the heavier precipitation. And with the warmer air, a lot of this is going to be rain as we start to see a southerly flow bring up warmer air. Nonetheless, this is the best precipitation chance we've seen in Arizona and New Mexico and southern Colorado for a while into the panhandles. It's just not going to be very heavy. Starting to see moisture come back into the Pacific Northwest again. We'll talk about that here in a minute. But notice this big area of white right here. This is going to be a very quiet week of weather. Now, there's one benefit of this. If the low is going to be down here and the main jet stream winds are over there and the flow is kind of split, that keeps strong winds aloft away. And if you have the strong winds aloft away, you're going to avoid that W word. Snowfall looks like this. You can see out there in the plains, going to be warm enough that a lot of that's going to be rain. But back into southern Colorado, northern New Mexico, back into the mountains of Arizona, and southern Utah, going to be a little bit of snowfall. Talked about the wind. This is the potential for wind gusts between now and Thursday. So you can see that these peak wind gusts aren't doing much by our standards, especially up here. So this is going to be nice. We're going to have a break in the weather, but it's not going to be very windy. That's good to see. Now, one thing to point out, if you're not really windy this time of year, and with snow-covered basins and valleys, especially over around here, you're not going to warm up a lot. You're going to keep the nights cold, the days cool. But the rule of thumb in the winter, if you really, really want to warm up, you're going to have to get pretty windy to scour out the cold air. That's not going to happen, but it'll be nice not to have to worry about high wind events like we've had to deal with here lately. You do see some wind down here with the low as it goes across the southern areas. As we get to the weekend, this is where things start to get a little bit more murky with the weather forecast. So this is the 1st of February, Saturday, February 1st. We have a zonal flow. So this is a more mild flow. The Arctic air is cut off. So a lot of the nation going to be able to warm up. Temperatures start to get warmer. We still have a lot of very deep cold air up here. And there's a lot of cold air underneath this low right here as well. But a westerly flow commences. That westerly flow, onshore flow, does get Washington, Oregon, and Northern California wet, moving into the mountains of Idaho and western Montana by the weekend. But you're getting downsloped east of the Continental Divide in this pattern, and that will lead to a bit more wind by the weekend, but also some moderating temperatures. What happens after this is where it gets a little bit more tricky. We showed you last week that there was going to be this low here and this low here, and the models were going to have a hard time trying to figure out if they join or stay separate, because in the long-range forecast, this is absolutely pivotal in terms of what will happen after this pattern of west to east flow wants to get more amplified. So let's take a look. So this is Saturday, this 1st of February coming on up. By the Tuesday, Wednesday time frame, the European wants to break off this pocket of very cold air and put it off the coast of British Columbia, disconnecting it from this very cold area, basically the vortex of very cold air that's over Hudson Bay. And then it's wanting this low here and this low here to kind of come together. And notice the high pressure ridge gets its neck cut off. And we talked about this. If the neck gets cut off of the high, then we have more westerly flow, and the really cold air can't get into the west. You get very wet in the Pacific Northwest and Northern California from this storm. But the Central Rockies, this area right here, basically stays mild and in a westerly flow. Now, that's the European model, but we have some discrepancies. The artificial intelligence version of the European model is somewhat similar, but notice this. Okay, the high pressure ridge is maintaining itself and they're not merging. If that's the case, then this low does come into the west after the 5th or 6th of February. So after the 5th or 6th of February, we have this scenario here, or this scenario. The GFS, or the American model, is very similar to the artificial intelligence version. So which one's going to be right? Well, time will tell, but the separation between these lows is critical. I will tell you this, the European model does have a bit of a bias of wanting to merge lows together like this. So the European model this time around is suspect. The AI version, which does include historical precedent, is more like the GFS or the American model. Then after the 5th or 6th of February, that's when we'll probably see stormy weather potentially come back into the central and northern Rockies, but the southern areas as well. And notice there's a connection. They're not separated here. There's a little bit of a merger of the cold air masses up here. So we've got our work cut out for us to figure out what happens. But all of this really isn't until after the 4th or 5th of February. Between now and then, we're going to see fairly quiet weather as we go through the end of the month. Have yourself a good Monday. We'll see you tomorrow.